Now is it working? Okay, there we go. Can you hear me now? All right. This is on, well, that pretty much says it. Exploiting, abusing, securing server extensions, Windows Server 2003. Okay, this is going to be interesting because, well, the server extensions have had an interesting history. They originally purchased from Vermeer Technologies for like $80 million in stock, or 80 to $100 million in stock. They have had a bad reputation, security reputation, and well, a lot of people just stopped putting them on their server. A lot of people, a lot of checklists recommend not installing the server extensions on a production server. And a lot of people quite frequently ask me if they can be secure. And for quite some time, I told people no, they cannot be made secure. And you should not run them on a server, on a production server. But this presentation is about how to make them secure. Server extensions, for a while, we thought they were going to die. You know, people stopped putting them on their servers, but they seem to have made a little bit of a comeback here. They have been included on a lot of new products: SharePoint, Office, XP, VisualStudio.net, and it seems like they're here to stay. So the question is, how do we secure them? But let me start off with my experience with the FrontPage server extensions. Just right here. I started off playing around with them right when they first came out. I was learning HTML, and so I'd open up websites and learn how they write their code, how they do all the different tricks. And I noticed that some sites would open up just fine. Some sites would prompt me for a password, and then some sites would open up and give me server-side code. And at the time, I knew nothing about security, but I knew something was up there, and so I started spending some time researching. And actually, the FrontPage server extensions were the first security work that I did, and it's kind of what got me into security. But well, kind of got me into what got me into security. But anyway, started playing around and started realizing a lot of sites had the server extensions, and a lot of sites had the server extensions running insecurely. And just to give you a couple stories here, trying to decide which stories I can tell. Well, okay, let's start with this one. There was a friend of mine who got very angry with a company and went to their website, and on the website has the owner of the company, who was the guy who made him angry, this big picture on the front page of the website. So what he did is it took him about 10 seconds to figure out that the front page server extensions were on there and they were not secure. So he took the guy's picture and kind of modified it a little bit. It was real subtle. He just made one ear bigger, Kai's Power Goo stuff. And then saved it, put it back on there, and it was there for a week. They thought it was really cool. We all thought it was cool. So we went back again, changed the picture a little bit more. So the picture was there for a week. He changed it more. It got to the point where this guy's picture on the front page of the website, by the way, the picture, and it looks like a Alfred E. Newman Spock troll. I mean, his face was so distorted, but it was such a subtle thing that no one ever really picked up on it. And it was there for like 2 months. And this guy did this every day. It was his morning ritual. He'd go in, check his email, check his voicemail, mess this guy's face up. And it just made him happy. If you ever get an opportunity to do that, I'd highly recommend it. Legally do that. Anyway, another situation I had was I used to be a software developer, and I had a component I was using in a project, and we were 6 months in the project, and I ran into a bug in the component. The developer, I was like the only person in the whole world who ever ran into this bug, and so he wasn't really willing to fix it for me. He did say it would be fixed in the next release, but I didn't have time to wait for that, so I just playing around, and this is a long time ago when the security world was much different. And I basically saw his computer was on the internet and had FrontPage server extensions running, and so I just fixed the bug myself. And I got me a nice fixed patched version of the software after that. That was one you're supposed to laugh at. If you didn't catch on that. Is this thing working? Anyway, and I got realizing that a lot of people really didn't understand FrontPage server extensions and security. Yeah, they're confusing. A lot of people don't really understand how it works and what it does, what the server extensions do. There's a lot of confusion about what is part of the server extensions, what's FrontPage, what's personal web server. In fact, a lot of vulnerabilities associated with FrontPage server extensions are actually with other products, such as personal web server. But the question is, are the FrontPage server extension as insecure as everyone says? And like I said, it makes on checklists, do not install them on a server. So the actual risks are, there's an increased attack surface. Obviously, running more services, having more DLLs, you are going to increase the attack surface. There's more potential for holes. You create an entry point into your network or onto your web server. When you open up a page in FrontPage, if you have them properly configured, you're prompted for a password. Normally this is good, but it's also an opportunity to brute force that password or lock out an account or whatever you want to do. And if you already have a password, it's an opportunity to get on the server. Information gathering, which has always been the biggest weakness with FrontPage server extensions. You can gather quite a bit of information. You can figure out server software, server versions, even web stats, all kinds of stuff. They run on the system partition, which is, geez, it's been long-standing advice. In fact, I actually remember, see David sitting over here. I remember David's bug track post, must have been 4 years ago, when you pretty much said that the web root shouldn't be on the server, the main partition, the system partition. It should be on its own partition. And, we all kind of picked up that advice after that, and Microsoft has followed that advice. But the server extensions run on the system partition, and there's no way to choose which partition to install it on, and there's no way to change it. Well, there's no way to automatically change it. So it's definitely a big risk. I had a client once, a banking client. They were, through a strange mixture of circumstances, they had the FrontPage server extensions running, and they had one patch that they had not applied. They had applied the patches in the wrong orders on an NT4 system. And so the server extensions were vulnerable to the Unicode exploit, and someone broke in through the FrontPage server extensions directory and was able to run commands and basically steal the whole database. So, you don't run virtual directories on the system partition, so you need to change that. Insufficient logging. The logging sucks. It doesn't really tell you what's happening, and the log files are stored on the web root, and they're hard to manage, and so that itself is a problem. Another issue here is storing files within the web root. They store configuration files as child directories to the web root, and you've all seen those files, those directories, which I'm going to mention here later. Greater risk is, first of all, the security model is confusing. It used to be that the security model was based on the NTFS permissions of the individual DLLs. Now it's based on the NTFS permissions of the web root. Another issue is it runs in process with iNet info. On 2003, it will run in its own pool, but basically you've got an elevated privilege there. You've got on a Windows 2000 box, they're running as system. On Windows 2003, they're going to run as network service, I believe. Relaxed NTFS permissions, when you install the server extensions, they're going to lighten the NTFS permissions more than I would normally run on a server, and they cannot be secured without NTFS. Now, this is probably one of the biggest problems I've ever seen with the server extensions, that people install it on a FAT partition. In fact, I saw a site hacked because someone accidentally had left a FAT partition on the system partition. The web root was NTFS, but the system partition was FAT, and so someone was able to go in and author it. So if you learn anything here today, is that you cannot secure the server extensions on a FAT partition. Got that right? What happens, David, what happens when you install the NTFS permissions on a FAT partition? Or the front page server extensions on a FAT partition.
Well, running a FAT partition is not good idea. Either vulnerability or security.
You get hacked, right? Yeah, that's what I wanted. You get hacked. What happens if you don't what happens if David doesn't pay attention? It's hacked. All right, anyway, the basic files that have been around forever are shtml.dll, author.dll, and admin.dll. They are basically the same file. shtml.dll has forked a little bit to include some other functions, but author and admin are the same file. The reason why it's like that is just because it's a leftover from, yeah, that slide's boring anyway, so is that one. Anyone have any questions on that part? I'll just skip right over that. All right, let's get into the deep stuff here. Front page server extensions work by sending post requests to the front page server extension binaries, whether it be shtml.dll, author.dll, or admin.dll. The post is to the DLL. I don't know if you can read that there. And the body of the post contains the actual command that you are submitting. In this case, the command is list documents, and then it has all the parameters for the command after that. What the front page server extensions do is if you send a request to the binary, it first checks the permissions for the anonymous user account on the web root of that directory. If the anonymous web user does not have permissions for that, then it prompts you for a password. You enter password, and it checks those permissions, and so on until is it able to authenticate you. You can also submit VTI RPC commands, which is the command that's in the body there. You can send them as a get to owssvr.dll, or you can send multiple posts using XML-based language called CAML. Is that what you guys call it, CAML? CAML? But the interesting thing is what's in this RPC packet here. It's a very poorly documented language and has caused quite a bit of confusion. The sample output basically gives you a HTML output like this, and it'll tell you the server version. It tells you this one is actually a result from a list services command. It tells you different information. It tells you about the information. You see a UX, SR, that indicates the permissions of whether this information is protected or public. This is the interesting command here, list services. You send a method, list services method, to a front page server extensions server, and you get a list of websites on that server. You get a list of, you can find out if a website is protected or not, and you can gather lots of other information, like I showed in the last slide there. The interesting thing is the amount of information that's shared. Anyone can see this. Anyone sending a post to the server extensions gets to see, like you see this SRMSIS. It's, you know, it's an IIS server. You see the server extensions version, major, minor version there. You can see usage hits by week. So they get 337 hits the first week, 380 hits next week. Usage hits by month. You can see the welcome names. We got default HTM, default ASP, default.aspx, which tells us they have .NET server running, or the .NET framework running. We see this VTI bin, VTI admin, FP admin, ADM DLL.dll. Where do you guys do that? DLL.dll? Anyway, so you can find out quite a bit of information. You can find out email addresses. You can find out who runs the website. There's just a wealth of information there. Jeez, I'm already over here. You know what? I need to get some input here. I'm already like halfway through here, and I haven't even gotten. The issue here is that front page server extensions are confusing, and they're hard to follow, and they're hard to understand the security models used. And there's a lot of things left over from an old framework, from an old program that was not intended to be secure, was not written to be secure, and basically they're adding new features onto old programs that already are flawed. Let me just get to the exploits. Basically, the biggest problem I've seen with the front page server extensions are that they're confusing, and they're hard to secure, and they're hard to patch, and they're hard to keep track of. So it's actually quite easy to exploit the server extensions because of that. It's not so much that the server extensions themselves are flawed. It's that that it's difficult to know where your holes are, know what you've done wrong. There's a lot of leftovers. There's a lot of code. I was just talking to some of the developers here earlier. I was asking about some of the code in the hex that I saw in there, and you know, they don't really know what it is. And so it kind of makes me wonder about the server extensions. Now, in researching this stuff, I've been playing around with server extensions for several years now, and there's been hundreds and hundreds of holes that I've found, that others have found, and not all of them have been made public. Not all of them have been shared. For a long time, no one's really cared about the server extensions, so I just stopped sharing a lot of the stuff. But in preparing this, I went through my old list of exploits, and a lot of them had been fixed, and actually I've sent about 10 million, I had a Perl script send about 10 million requests to the server extensions trying to overflow them, and they held up pretty well. There were no overflows that I had encountered, but there were a lot of weird things that I ran into when I was doing this. For example, if you make a request to shtml.dll to any file, and the file is not there, does nothing. It says You guys changed this. It's last minute fixes. Depending on what. Nice. Okay. You guys keep ruining all my good exploits here. You keep fixing this stuff. On every version except for the one I'm running on my laptop, I just updated, made sure I got all the proper updates, which, you know, rests my point even further. That's the confusing issue is which updates do you install. You know, I had a good DOS too, and that one got fixed too. And you can see one in my recently. Anyway, on most versions of the server extensions, if you request a file that is not there, what you get is an error message that says cannot open, and it returns the name of the file. It says no such file or folder. When the file is there, you get this error message that you see here. So you can actually use the server extensions to do a CGI scan on the server. Now, the interesting thing about the server extensions is a lot of times people have them installed but do not use them, and so therefore do not update them. And so it is actually quite common to be able to go to a site and do a full CGI scan on their server through shmail.dll, just by interpreting the different output you get. The interesting thing about it is because it's in the body of in the post method there, that it actually evades detection by many IDSs, depending on how the rules are written. But you know, a lot of them, the IDSs are expecting the exploit string in the URL itself. So this puts it in the post method. So it's a good way to avoid detection there. Plus, when they look in their log files, all they'll see is 100 requests to shhtml.dll. There's some other issues here, like this one's probably fixed too. Doing something like, yeah, see it. Please the server's application log, okay. And we go in the event viewer and we look at the application log and we see 2 warnings. Cannot open file aux.htm for reading and permission denied, which is a good way to fill up someone's application log. You know, you get two application log entries for every URL you send. Again, these are just minor issues. Some of the more major issues I've found, there's some confusion about which version they affect, and so I'm not going to be able to release all those details here. Another interesting thing is that the way the FrontPage server extensions work is they've got they used to be an executable file for the SHTML and the author. They used to be shhtml.exe, author.exe, and admin.exe. These files were, there was a copy of each of these files for each website on your server. They then went to a stub where these files were just a stub to the master file. Then it went to a shared DLL file. To maintain compatibility, Microsoft made the ISAPI filter that converts all requests for shhtml.exe to shhtml.dll. Now, if you make a request to shhtml.exe, you get the same message. Oh, by the way, as part of my tools, I have a little Perl script that takes ASCII art and puts it into someone's log files, which is really kind of funny because the psychological effect is amazing. You know, it's one thing to have your site defaced, but when people go in their log files and they see Alfred E. Newman, it's just really disheartening. And all it is you're putting stuff in the log files, but it's amazing the impact it has. So I always be sure I do that when I pen test someone. Okay, if you look down here, the file that we sent was shhtml.exe, and then it shows in the log files as request for shhtml.dll, even though we requested .exe. Now, Interesting thing about that, the way the server extensions work is they've got a copy of the files here in shared web server extensions 4.0 ISAPI. All the files go here in this directory, and then in your website, the VTIBin directory shows up as a virtual directory mapped to that directory on the C partition, is what I was talking about before. Now, if you have a file there named shtml.exe, it will never be called because the ISAPI filter changes the name, and so it never actually is seen by IIS. However, if you do something like this and just stick another slash in it, you get an internal server error, and the reason is because I just renamed the DLL. But it actually called that shtml.exe file, and if we look in the log files, it shows up as shtml.exe. So it actually called the shtml.exe. The point is that it's an interesting way to hide a Trojan in someone's website is creating a file called html.exe and then using 2 slashes when you access it. Some of the other holes I found, well, yeah, and that's the thing about the front page server extensions I should have mentioned earlier, is that by themselves they're not always that great for, well, great in the perspective of a hacker's great. They're not always that bad from someone else's perspective. But when used in conjunction with other exploits, they can be very powerful. Like, for example, I said it gives you an entry point to the network. Well, yeah, you can try to brute force the password, but if you already have a password, that's a good way to get in. Or the information it has. Well, the information itself isn't going to be useful, but use that information with another exploit. It's quite useful. So, yeah, you have to be in, but use that, in combination with something else. Someone could hide a Trojan on your server for years, and you'd never notice it. They'll look in the log files, they'll see request to shtml.exe, you browse to that, and you get the server extensions. So, just, these are, the point of bringing this stuff up isn't to point out how to hack the server extensions. It's the kind of stuff that kind of demonstrates the fact that they increase the server exposure, they increase the attack surface, basically, and kind of demonstrate what kind of changes need to be made on these server extensions to make them more secure. Another thing I ran into is the include bot can include itself, which is kind of interesting when a file includes itself and then includes itself and then includes itself. You can identify the service pack level by looking at the front page server extensions version, so you can do one request to server and know exactly where they're at. You can detect the presence of the front page server extensions 2002 by different headers that the SharePoint installs. Server headers. There's a couple DOSes I found. One of them is interesting. That it's by creating a long URL. I noticed I was running file. I started off by looking for overflow exploits. I just couldn't find any. They've done a real good job going through and protecting themselves there. So I started running FileMon, see what I could find that way, and see what it was doing in the background. I did one of the RPC methods with looking for a /A/B/C directory. It checked for /A/B/C, then it checked for /A/B, then it checked for /A. Oh, that's interesting. So I did /A 5,000 times, and it pretty much brought the server to 100% CPU. But it didn't crash it. If you crash IIS, it restarts. So it brought up to 100% CPU, and kind of almost completely disables it, but not totally. Like if you're using load balancing, it won't pull it out of the pool because it still sees it. You get about 50% packet loss. The only way to fix it is to reset IIS, which you can't terminal service into it because you got 50% packet loss. So it's just an interesting thing like that. Another thing is that if you don't set the permissions right, now initially the permissions are set fairly good. They could be a lot better, but they're set fairly good. But in my experience, dealing with administrators, is that permissions never really stay at what they originally were, or I should say developers are even worse. And you tend to get permissions changed, lightened. Someone can't get something working, so they lighten the permissions or whatever. And that's when it starts really being a problem, because then anyone can get access to the various configuration files, or even access to the website itself. Here's an interesting one. If you're using the FrontPage client to connect to a website and you authenticate, you log in, you author your website, you close the website, but don't close the front page itself, anyone can come along and reconnect to your website and authenticate automatically. So if you're using FrontPage to administer a website, be sure to exit the whole thing. Another interesting thing is if you're in a website and you exit out FrontPage without closing the website, next time you come in, it'll automatically open that website, which is, the first thing that comes to my mind is what if I go to my website, exit out the FrontPage, run a sniffer on my site, someone goes into their, opens up FrontPage again, tries to log in, they're logging into my website, and I get their password. There were some issues I found in overflowing the client, which is kind of interesting. You can actually use a server to overflow the client. There were some cross-site scripting issues in the search form, the database results search form. There are also some SQL injection issues there, where you could actually put in the search form, you could close off the HTML for the input box, put a quote and a greater than sign, and then write your own HTML, and that HTML is returned in the actual page. But the biggest problem with server extension is updating the server extensions. And talking with the office guys over here, guys and people over here, that's the frustration they have too. Is that who owns FrontPage? First thing I asked them, so who owns FrontPage? And then they just kind of laughed. Do that again. Come up here and do that where I asked you that, and you guys. Anyway, and the thing is, they own FrontPage. It's an Office product, but it's also included with Windows, Visual Studio.net. It's included with SharePoint. I mean, it's a standalone product. So it's when you go to update it, the question is, what updates do you use? Finding the product updates is often difficult. Scott may remember the complaints I had before about sometimes the updates are just hidden and you don't really know about them when they come out. They used to not be updated with the Windows 2000 service packs, but now they are. But they're also updated with the Office service packs, and they're also updated alone, and they're also updated with XP, and so it's confusing and it's inconsistent, which makes it very difficult to fix it. And then there's some things that you have to fix manually. So, it's hard knowing. I had on one of some of these exploits I was trying. They didn't work. They didn't work because I guess I updated my box wrong. My server I was testing is on. I had the wrong version. And I'd run all the updates and everything, but I was actually testing on a previous version. And unless you get them installed right and in the right order. Another thing is that they aren't cumulative. You often have to install all the hotfixes in the correct order. And the thing is, the bulletins are confusing. I got to read you this because it's such a great example. Anyone ever seen this one? It's MS02053. Okay, download locations for this patch. You've got Microsoft FrontPage Server Extensions 2002 for all platforms, or for SharePoint Team Services 2002, we recommend Office XP SP2, which contains a number of other security fixes. Which ones? Are they not included with these? If for some reason a web administrator cannot apply Office SP2, we recommend the FrontPage Server Extension 2002 patch listed above. Microsoft FrontPage Server Extensions 2000 for NT4, Microsoft FrontPage Server Extensions 2000 for Windows XP. This fix is included in Windows XP Service Pack 1. Users who do not wish to apply Service Pack 1 should apply this patch. And then Microsoft FrontPage Server Extensions 2000 for Windows 2000. And then you've got some issues here. FrontPage Server Extensions 2002, the patch can be applied on all platforms which support FrontPage Server Extensions 2002, and then FrontPage Server Extension 2000. The patches can be applied on the following systems running FrontPage Server Extension 2000, Windows XP Gold, Windows 2000, and NT4. And it says this fix for this issue will be included in Windows 2000 SP4, Windows XP SP1, and any future service packs for FPSE 2002. And then you've got the patch can be installed. FrontPage Server Extensions 2000 patches on Windows 2000 and Windows XP can be uninstalled. FrontPage Server Extensions 2000 patches for NT4 cannot be uninstalled. FrontPage Server Extensions 2002 patch cannot be uninstalled. Yeah, so it gets, and caveats. Oh, okay. Well, there's a caveat to all this. Users running FrontPage Server Extensions 2002 on any supported platform who have not applied the latest update will need to apply the update before installing this patch. To learn more about this, anyway, you get my point here. It gets really confusing. Which update do you install? Which, if you've installed some products, which do you have to install the other ones? Do some products overwrite? It says included with Office XP Service Pack 2. Well, and it says that one includes other security fixtures. Well, what if you're running the Windows 2000 version? Say you're running Windows 2000 with FrontPage Server Extension 2002, and you've got XP Service Pack 2. Well, which order do you install them? So it's almost impossible to know without going through every single version, file version, and comparing them that way. HTMage.exe and ImageMap.exe, these have had some holes for quite some time, and these are actually very common. I see these all the time on servers, and it's because there's a manual step. I mean, people will go through and they have their software update services running, they install the hot fixes, but there's no installation for this. You have to remove 2 files. But the problem is you remove the files and Windows File Protection puts them back. So you go and you delete them from the DLL cache. But the problem is with SP3, they changed that so that now it keeps prompting you for the Windows CD to replace those files. So, I don't know what I meant by that, but the solution was to delete the files. Oh, another thing is that these files were actually included with Service Pack 2, which came out after the bulletins came out, and the security rollups that were included. The vulnerable versions of these files were included in those security rollups and the Service Pack 2. Finally, in Service Pack 3, what they did is they stuck in a stub that basically a neutered version of the file. So apparently that is the real solution, is you installing Service Pack 3 will replace it with a stub version of the file, but the files will no longer be functional if you use them, which their recommendation is to not use them. Security model. Anyone? I'm assuming you're all here because you use FrontPage Server Extensions, or you develop them, or you're involved with who here's from Microsoft, by the way? Is this like all Microsoft? I'm just talking. Do you all use the FrontPage Server Extensions on your servers to some extent? I mean, I assume you're here because you have some reason to know how to secure them. Anyone? Anyone use the server extensions on their servers?
They come with SharePoint.
Yeah, they come with SharePoint. They're an integral part of SharePoint, in fact. It's the whole foundation for that. So you use those SharePoint on your servers?
Well, we're looking at SharePoint version 2. We want to know what we have sitting on our server. Page extensions are under
Is it clear to you how the security model works?
No, they're just a mystery of data.
And exactly, that's what pretty much everyone says. They're just a mystery, and it's why. Why are they such a mystery? I mean, they don't really use the IS model, but they don't really use NTFS permissions completely. I mean, you can't just set NTFS permissions on each individual file, however you want to set access. It's all based on the web root. You've basically got 3 roles in FrontPage. You've got browse, author, administer. Browse is generally the public. Authors and then administrators are able to change settings of the web itself. Authors can change the content. It's all based on the NTFS permissions for the web root, or if you have subwebs that inherit permissions on the parent web root. If someone has read permissions on the web root, they have read permissions for server extensions. If they have write permissions on the web root, they have write permissions they have author permissions, for the server extensions. If they have change or modify or full control permissions on the web root, then they have administer permissions. Now with the SharePoint, there's a couple other roles added, and you can make your own custom roles, but those are the 3 basic roles. And it's pretty common to mess that up, and it's not uncommon at all to for people to change the permissions on the web root, not realizing that they're also changing the permissions for the server extensions. And again, if you have a fat partition, then you don't have such thing as NTFS permissions, and therefore, if you run a fat partition on the web root, what happens? If you run a fat partition with the server extensions, you get hacked, right?
Fat partitions are kind of antique these days. You can see them very often. There's plenty of solutions to access NTFS partitions, IMF partitions, and all over the place, ranging from third-party tools to all sorts of things. And I think it's worth it just not to have your risk policy properly. NTFS is far more robust just from that standpoint. So
Yeah. Right, but there's also developers. Developers, use FrontPage oftentimes on their own machine, and they have their own copy of the website, their development copy of the website, and a lot of times it's changing more. But it was very common for a long time to see developers using Windows 98 or Windows 95. Now you've seen a lot more XP. But what I've found is if I didn't see the FrontPage server extensions open on the website, I'd go find out who the developers were and go for their system. And a lot of times we're running fat partitions. And the fact is, it is changing a lot, but you still see it too much, So you can't not run the server extensions on a fat partition if I haven't emphasized that enough. Okay, when you clean install the Windows server, you can uncheck the server extensions. Make sure they're not installed. But if you look there, the directories are still there. And the question is, why are they still there if you unchecked it? A lot of people used to tell me that you can't not install them. But what I found out is it's basically due to Windows file protection. Windows file protection monitors directories. It needs the directories to be there and actually holds those directories open. And so it creates those directories. It creates the directory structure. If you go into safe mode and delete the whole entire FrontPage directory structure and then reboot, the Windows file protection will actually recreate those directories. And if you look in the Windows file protection executables, all these things, all these files and directories are all hard-coded in there. Why won't they uninstall? I don't know. But they don't uninstall. If you uninstall them, they just don't go completely. You have to actually manually uninstall them. And how do you remove them? Well, the answer is that you go into safe mode and you delete the whole entire directory and the copies in DLL cache, and even then you'll still be prompted for the Windows CD, and you just have to put up with that until we get a proper, put that one on your list, you guys. The uninstall. Did you guys hear that back there? Okay. Moving the binaries. I said that you shouldn't put them on the system partition, so what do? You move them to a different partition. Problem is you don't get to choose where to install them when you initially install them. How do you move them? Well, what you do basically is you move the binaries to you copy the binaries, that's not right. You copy the binaries to the new location, you update the registry, any references to the old location, change them to the new location, and then you update the database. Any references to the old location, you put them in the new, reference them to the new location. I have a batch file also that does this entire process. and then you re-register any COM components in the new location. Then every time you update, you repeat the process. So you can move them, it's just a pain in the butt to do that. Securing the front page server extension. Okay, this is the whole point of the talk here. The front page server extensions can be used safely if you, and they can't be used safely under all circumstances, but if you do have control of who your authors are and where the authors are authoring from, then you can secure them. You got to have secure user accounts, secure your user accounts. You set the proper NTFS permissions, not the defaults they give you. You configure the registry defaults. You keep patched if you can figure out how to do that. Use SSL for authoring. If you don't have an SSL certificate, just use a self-signature, self-sign one, or go to free SSL or something and get a certificate. There's no reason not to do that. You got to manage the log files and set IP restrictions. But that's all pretty. There's a lot to that. We're talking a lot of restrictions here. If you can restrict people from certain sites to IP addresses to access the server extensions, then you can use those techniques. Another technique is to set up a mirror site in IIS, and basically the mirror site has all the front page server extensions, has everything you need in there. The regular website doesn't have that stuff. It doesn't have the front page server extensions enabled, but it has this. I said that backwards. You get your regular website, and then on the mirror site, the front page server extension site, you map all the same virtual directories to this mirror site. You can use the mirror site then to author all your stuff without having to put any of the front page directories on the actual site. The problem is that's not going to really work if you make extensive use of the web bots. But it is quite effective. Another thing is URL scan rules. You can set up rules to limit who can have access to it, or how it's accessed. Another thing is a custom ISAPI filter. I've got a filter, and I'll include this all in the download. It'll be on the Black Hat website probably by next week. I've got a custom ISAPI filter that basically looks for requests, and this would be cool if this was built in, but it looks for requests to the front page binaries, and then checks your IP address, and if you're in the allowed IP address range, it lets you through, and if you're not, it just says 404. So anyone else who looks at them will think that they're not there. The other solution is to neuter the front page server extension through NTFS restrictions. Like I said, anyone can have access to all this information through shtml.dll, but you can actually set permissions on that. Now, if you don't many people use the front page server extensions for authoring, but don't really make use of the web bots. In that case, you can set NTFS restrictions on shtml.dll. That way, when you go to request it, it's going to request authentication. You authenticate, and you're able to author a site normally. It works transparently for front page, but anyone who wants to come in and play around with shtml.dll will not be able to do that without being authenticated. The other thing you can do is remove some of the directories that are on there. If you don't use the bots, then you can remove many of the directories that are on there. Again, there's so many different configurations there. That depends on what you're doing. Another thing you can do is disable authoring. If you use the web bots, but use another method for uploading your sites, then you can disable author.dll and admin.dll, but still allow the web bots. So it's protects you a little bit more there. There are some other tricks. I'm actually working on an ISAPI filter that uses regular expressions to do more advanced filtering. Spotting attacks. Okay, log entries. Oh, if you ever see this, that's probably because I was there. No, the log entries. You basically got. It's pretty obvious what product someone's using. You got. Can anyone see that? You'll see requests to the various binaries. You'll also see the user agent. In fact, the user agent will tell you which product they're using. Now, I mentioned there's front pages integrated with many products. You see it as web folders. You see them. There's actually an ADO driver to access front page front page and web dev enabled sites. So you can see right here. Microsoft Data Access Internet Publishing Provider Protocol Discovery, which is what FrontPage does to see if the site is WebDAV enabled. You'll see, depending on, like, someone's trying to do a scan for FrontPage sites. I wrote a bunch of scripts for RFP's Whisker, and those are actually integrated as part of the product now, but you'll see a lot of scans there for like registration.txt, and you'll see the telltale sign that it's a CGI scan. Now, an interesting thing, there's a Puerto Rican government site that was defaced, and I took a look at the log files, and it was a pretty busy site. And it was hard to track down exactly where the intrusion occurred and what happened, and there weren't a lot of the typical things that you see when a web intrusion occurs. And so I started. What happened is they had replaced the index.html and then created a graphic there, which is very graphic. What I did is basically started looking through the web files. When you visit a website and you download the graphic, the first time you'll get a 200 status code. Second time you come back there, if it's in your cache, you'll get a 302. So I've seen all these 302s. So I looked back to find the first 200, where the 200s first started appearing, and then that took me to 3 lines of log entries. And basically what they were was one post to the one post to the SHTML DLL to see if the FrontPage server extensions were password protected, and then 2 posts to author DLL that basically uploaded the 2 files. It didn't even do any checking, just uploaded index.html and this graphic file. 3 lines. Someone defaced a website, 3 lines, and it was looking at the user agent string. I could tell that it was the web component in Visual Basic. So it was basically some Visual Basic app that some guy runs to deface websites. Interesting thing is it used index.html. He probably would have been better off going with something like documents, like default HTML, because that's the first in the list. That way if there was an index, if there's default HTML, it'll take that one first. Otherwise, it'll go to the next one. Anyway, so 3 lines, hacked a website. That's the kind of stuff that's going on with the stuff with the FrontPage server extension. Actually, in my experience in investigating or responding to intrusions, the FrontPage server extensions were involved probably about 75% of the time, in some way. Anyway, the other trails are files in the server extensions, and one interesting thing about the server extensions is if you use the client, and I'm not sure if this is true on the newer clients, but if you use the FrontPage editor, it actually leaves some information on the server's configuration files where you came from. If you look at the actual services.cnf and the various files there, you can actually see the net BIOS name of the client that last changed it. FrontPage server extensions versus WebDAV, I don't know why I put that there. So they're kind of the same, but kind of different. Snort Rules. The thing I've noticed on the Snort Rules is they're largely insufficient in detecting front page attacks, and the reason is it's the same thing, is that people really don't understand front page, and therefore they don't understand how to write the rules. What I've noticed here is actually a lot of the URLs that I put in that Whisker script. A lot of these things really aren't significant anymore. I mean, you don't really see authors.pwd very much anymore. You don't see orders.txt and registrations.htm. Those were things I stuck in there because they were common at one time and unprotected too. Form results.htm, form results.txt. But most of the stuff you really don't see. 4 dots, that's a personal web server one. dvwssr.dll, that's a Visual InterDev 1. And then here you got this bottom rule is just VTI bin access. Anyone access VTI bin, it puts a snort event. So anyway, what I've done is I've gone through and created a bunch of snort rules that are more specific. For example, that look for specific VTI RPC methods, so you can find out if someone has deleted files from the site or changed configuration settings or whatever, and those I will also include in the download. But it's a lot of times you do legitimately use the front page server extensions, but you don't want people authoring it from certain IP addresses or whatever, and this will give you a lot more control over that. You can also use the Snort rules to log front page server extension actions. Now, like I said, the log files they kind of suck. They tell you what, a lot of times they'll tell you what the VTI RPC method is, but they won't tell you the actual parameters of the method. So like say someone deleted a file, but you don't know what file they deleted, or if they created one or whatever. And with the Snort rules, you can actually trigger on every VTI RPC method that's sent, and then create your own little log file of what's going on there. I got some tools. XFP.pl, it's a Perl script. Basically, it scans websites for front page server extensions. FPSE info, it pulls the services file and extracts that and puts it in a more readable format. Basically, you can look at all the different subwebs on a site. It used to be on the old front page client 98. You could connect to a site and you could list all the subwebs, which is really interesting because you could. There's quite a few times I connected to commercial websites and you see this, test one and then my web one, and you could connect to them without a password. Well, the sites are there. The new client doesn't show that. It doesn't show all the different subwebs unless they're directly underneath the main web. But the information is still there for backwards compatibility. So that's one of the things that tool does. SecureFPSE.cmd is basically a tool that sets the registry settings and relocates the server extensions to the right partition, to a safe partition. And the FP blocks the ISAPI filter I mentioned. And this is an interesting thing. It used to be that one time I ran my script, that XFP. I've had this tool for about 3 years now. And like I said, people didn't really care for a long time, and you just don't use the front page server extensions. Well, it used to be that I could scan a Class C address, and I actually one time had a little script that pulled a bunch of URLs from Yahoo, and then ran them through here, and it was amazing. It was like 75% of the companies would be configured wrong. That was back with NT4. But I just ran this on at 10 IP addresses. I found 2 sites that were open, and that was a good representation of where we're still at, 500 error. But it's why isn't this still fixed? I mean, why are people still getting this thing wrong? And it kind of illustrates the point that the server extensions are actually more important than people realize. A lot of people want to forget about them, but the fact is they're here to stay, and they're vulnerable. I already talked about that. Future of Actually, I have nothing to say on the future. It's just a good way to slide there. Does anyone have any questions? I kind of ran through this quick, and I'm not sure if I covered everything in enough detail. Does anyone have any questions specifically about server extension vulnerabilities or how to secure them? Okay, yeah, the question is there a URL? I will make these available on my website, issecurity.info, and also they will be available on the Black Hat website. One comment is that on the server extensions, if you run a front page server extension site, one quick way to check them is if you connect to your site and you're not prompted for a password, then no one else is prompted for a password. And another thing is, if they're not prompted for a password, they can usually upload executables or Trojans or just about anything they want. So it's significant risk if you have front page server extensions open, then your whole server is owned, most likely. Any other questions? Okay. The question is, what are the actual permissions needed for it to function properly? Now that's a good question. Depends on what you're doing. Now, if you're doing, say, like a discussion web bot, then you're going to need write access to, we're talking NTFS permissions here. You need write access to certain directories. On IS permissions, you don't need write access for anything ever. Well, very rare. But the NTFS permissions, either the anonymous web user or the user who will be accessing the website or the group, however you set that up, they need at least read access, oftentimes write, oftentimes full change permissions. And it's actually so complicated that I just gave up trying to figure it out, because it was there's just so many variables and there's so many different things that you could throw in there. For the basic permissions, if you don't use the web bots, all you need is read and write. On the VTI bin directory, that's when it's kind of interesting. What I do on that is it needs execute access on that. But what I do is I set on the directory itself, I do not allow write and I do not allow execute. And then I go to each of the binaries and set them individually. So if someone, say using a Unicode exploiter or something, uploads a new file to that directory, first of all, they wouldn't be able to write to it, that directory, but if they were able to upload something there, they wouldn't be able to execute it. And so that prevents new files in that directory from being executed as a way of limiting the exposure of having execute access. I try to stay away from any kind of execute access. Now the DLLs, even though they are DLLs, you'd still need execute NTFS permissions on those because they are ISAPI extension DLLs. On the root directory, again, it's based on the NTFS permissions. The best way to do that is to use the FrontPage Server Extensions wizard to set the permissions, change permissions to the tightest, and then go back and tighten it up even more based on your exact configuration. Another thing I had mentioned, I kind of lightly touched on, was the IP restrictions. If you have a FrontPage Server Extensions site and you only want your individual developers on your network to author the site, you can go through and set the IP restrictions on each of those individual virtual directories to only allow it to your specific IP range. And depending on whether you use the bots or not, you can also do that on shtml.dll. And that way, anyone else who tries to play around with the server extensions is not able to get anything. And I also mentioned, if you don't use the bots, you can ACL the shtml.dll, requiring people to authenticate before they get in there. Another thing I should also mention is when I set up the server extensions, I do not use administrators group to administer the website. I create a new group for administering them, and then I deny administrators permissions on those directories. On the DLLs, the front page binary DLLs. That prevents people from using administrator accounts to get in and gain access to the server extensions. It basically limits it to those access to the specific web authors or administrators or web administrators that you have set up without using the built-in administrator account. Any other questions?
I think there's some good knowledge base articles on how to use front page security. It's as you point out, it's not as user friendly as I'd like it to be. But if you go to the knowledge base and query on front page and security, you'll get some good knowledge base articles that will help.
Yeah, there are some good knowledge base articles. I would recommend not using them. Sorry. I would recommend using them, looking at them, and taking that information into account. But even still, they're often a little bit more liberal than they could be. I mean, you can lock those things down pretty tight, much further than what's recommended there. But yeah, there are knowledge base articles that do go into detail, and quite a bit of detail on that.
Your advice to remove execute permissions on the directory itself and add it to the individual files, that should actually be extended to other executables within the website itself.
Yeah.
It's a good trick that I picked up from the IIS security PM, and it's a good approach. So instead of making the whole directory executable, make the individual files that you
Right.
in that directory executable.
And yeah, and that carries through all of IS. It's, you know, set different permissions on the directories than you set on the files themselves. That way, any new files are created don't automatically have the permissions. Like, for example, you could not allow read access. Well, read access is a little bit different, but you can limit read access to inherited. And it gets really complicated because you can set up permissions on the directory itself, on subdirectories, and then on new files that are created. What I do is, on new files are created, I set it so that you don't have read access at all, or that no one has read access, or only administrators have read access. And then, you know, it gets kind of complicated when you upload new content. You actually have to specifically set the NTFS permissions to allow read access to that file, but it makes a server really secure. And when you're talking a high secure server, it makes all the difference. And the issue here is, I kind of went through this thing pretty quick, but it's the main point I want to make here is that security is all about control. It's all about being thorough. And the front page server extensions, you don't really have much control, and it's hard to really be thorough because of the complicated nature. I mean, you have to. I mean, I spent quite a bit of time researching and learning about all this stuff, and still I don't feel like I've done a thorough job of researching it. And it's very difficult to be thorough, and it's very difficult to be in control. Therefore, in general, I would say the front page server extensions are not secure, but they do have that potential. They do have the time. If you do spend the time with that, you can then make them reasonably secure, to very secure, depending on how much control you have over who accesses the site. Any other questions? Am I out of time? 5 minutes early. Okay. All right. That's it.